and welcome to ThoughtCast. I am Sukirti, and I'm back with a new episode to discuss something that is extremely critical for any thriving workplace or organization: the mental and emotional well-being of its employees. A topic often overlooked in performance management discussions or generally seen solely as HR department's KRA. Joining me today for this discussion is Aparna Piramal Raje. She is a popular writer, columnist, public speaker, educator, and advisor. She talks and writes about leadership, business, design, workplaces, education, and mental health. And what I found most fascinating about her is that she is a trained Lego serious play facilitator. With her book titled Chemical Khichdi: How I Hacked My Mental Health, Aparna seeks to create awareness on mental health by leveraging her personal experience. Welcome, Aparna, to today's episode. I'm so thrilled to talk to you today. So let's start our discussion. When reading about mental and emotional well-being, we often come across the term psychological safety. A lot of times I've seen people think of psychological safety in workplace as a feeling of bonding with colleagues and being nice with each other. But that's just the surface of it. So, what is psychological safety in the workplace actually, and how is it connected to overall mental health and feeling of emotional well-being?
So it's obviously camaraderie is a very big part of it. Obviously, you do need to have a sense of bonding with colleagues, and that is really important. But I really like this one definition of psychological safety, which was put together by a Harvard Business School professor called Amy Edmondson, which was really the belief that the team is a place where interpersonal risks can be taken. So it's a shared belief that if you are part of a team, you can take some risks with that team in terms of sharing your point of view, in terms of feeling safe that if you make mistakes, that there'll be somebody who will be an ally to you. So I think it's just that it goes beyond that sense of camaraderie to know that you can really be safe in this space. And there are different definitions and levels of safety also. There was another interesting article by Timothy Clark, which said that one aspect of safety is just inclusion safety, so that you are part of the conversation, you're being included. The next level is a learner safety, where you feel that you can ask questions and you can learn and grow in the environment you're working in. The third part is really the sense of contributor safety, where you feel that you can contribute, your views are taken into consideration, they are valued, your opinions are important to the people around you. And then very importantly, the last one is the idea of challenger safety, where you could actually challenge the status quo. So I think these levels of safety help us to understand where are we on this spectrum. Are we just at the stage where we're included, we're part of the team, we have that sense of bonding, or we're really at the stage where we can challenge even our bosses and really ask interesting questions or provocative questions? So I think psychological safety is quite, a big topic. So in terms of where how it relates to emotional and mental well-being, it's a very, very important part, because a lot of the opposite of psychological safety is toxic workplaces. And toxic workplaces are really, very, very detrimental to our emotional and mental well-being. There's data from McKinsey which shows that the Indian workforce is more stressed, anxious, and burnt out than any other country in Asia. And very, very high levels of burnout and stress, anxiety, depression. And a big reason for that is toxic workforce behavior. So this is something that is, really prevalent in our society. And it's really great that, you're taking this subject head on and discussing it. And the effect of this kind of behavior is that it stifles a lot of innovation and creativity. And, people are just living paycheck to paycheck, and then they eventually will leave. So you don't get you get a lot of workforce attrition, which is also a big part of our corporate culture. So psychological safety is really an essential and a necessary component of the topic that we are going to talk about today.
That was very interesting, Aparna, all the points that you highlighted here. We all know that the pandemic has had a great impact on all of our personal and professional lives. And in fact, even though it seems like a thing in the past now, I've seen people around me, and the effects of it still lingering for many. So my next question is that what dimension of mental health issues in the workplace have emerged due to the pandemic?
So I think there is one aspect which is very personal, which you just sort of talked about, right? That there are people who are dealing and struggling with personal losses. It could be a loved one, it could be a job loss in the family, some sort of bereavement, stress, anxiety, depression, loneliness. All of these effects of isolation it's really called the shadow pandemic, and it's still with us very much. And people are still struggling with the effects of that. So that is at a personal level, which then spills over to the professional level, because you're not able to perform in the same way that you were earlier because of these challenges that you're dealing with on the personal front. And I think in terms of the professional side, I think what the pandemic has really done is completely get us to renegotiate the social contract between the company, the employer, and the employee. I mean, I think the employee is now looking at boundaries, is now looking at the terms of engagement. And I think this is just happening all across the world, right? How many days a week do you need to come in? Who needs to come in? What is the point of coming in if everyone is doing Zoom calls? So I think that what is the nature of the design of the office? What is the purpose of the office? Is it about social capital? Where are we actually getting work done? So I think the whole nature of work and work life and the social contract between the employee and the employer is being renegotiated. So I think this is this is a conversation that is here to stay. It's not gonna go away.
Yeah, I think you've highlighted some very interesting points here again, and helped establish the connection between pandemic and how it deteriorated the mental health for many of us. All of us know someone in our life who is part of a toxic workplace, so to say. But there are many organizations also that actually advocate the mental and emotional well-being of their employees. And how have these organizations benefited from it?
Yes, so actually my colleague Kriti Krishnan and I have developed a framework for organizations in terms of looking at how they view mental health in the workplace. So there are some organizations which are aware, there are some organizations which are sensitive, and others which are transformative. So I'll just explain that in a line. The ones who are aware, they tend to have, let's say, an employee assistance program. They have facilities for counseling and therapy, and they do talks. They do that sort of stuff. But as you said right in the beginning, a lot of that is assigned to HR, and it's seen as an HR initiative as opposed to a leadership initiative. So many companies, I think, in India are still in that end of the spectrum. The sensitive ones, which are looking more when incidents happen, their case by case, they are empathetic to employees. If an employee has a mental health condition and is unable to function for some length of time, they give support. If there are caregivers in the organization, they give time off for that. So I think those are more on the sensitive side. And then transformative is really making it a business issue. Saying that this is something that is important to our business. It will affect how we look at our business. And so setting up, for example, mental health champions as allies in the workforce, which people can come and talk to, putting CSR money into supporting workplaces. So a good example of that would be Johnson & Johnson. They do a lot of work on mental health. They have a global ambassador for mental health who champions it. They support coalitions. Partly they're in the business of making psychiatric drugs, so they do understand this domain and this field very well, but they've gone beyond that in terms of the kind of work that they do. So
wow, I think there is just so much that organizations then can do in order to ensure a healthy workplace culture, because ultimately it boils down to that. So Parna, according to you, in a workplace setup, we've spoken about it in our previous parts of the discussion also, that generally HR is seen as the sole department responsible for taking care of mental health issues in the workplace. But in a workplace context, then when we look at the different stakeholders, whether it is the HR or it is the manager, team leaders, the CEO of the company, or the employees themselves, who is actually responsible, or do they work in tandem to ensure that there are proper policies in place and that the mental health and emotional well-being is taken care of?
So I think that's a great question, because I think mental health is really a team sport. Okay, it is not like a COVID where you just go into your room and you're isolated for a few days and you're expected to take care of yourself, and then you'll come back out and you'll have recovered and you can join the family and you can continue with your life, right? Mental health is a kind of situation where the individual really requires a lot of support, whether they have a serious condition or whether they're just going through a time where they're struggling with, let's say, stress, and they've got some sort of burnout. So wherever we are on the spectrum, I think this is something that we need to do collectively. So when you talked about all these stakeholders, they really need to come together. They need to understand the role they play in actually creating a healthy a healthy environment, right? What is the role that they play? What is the role that they play as an individual? What is the role they play as a manager, managing people? What is the role that they play in terms of how does the team function? And what is the role that they play as leadership, which includes HR, which includes the CEO. And finally, I would also say, what role do clients play in this? Because so much of workplace stress comes from, client side also meeting deadlines, and so what is the relationship with the organization? So I think it's all about the organization having alignment. So just to give an example, if you took something like workplace flexibility, everybody needs to be aligned to make workplace flexibility work, right? If you want to get into if you decided to put workplace flexibility as a policy in the organization, everybody would have to get aligned around it. Same thing with emotional and mental well-being. Everybody has a role to play. And the framework that we're beginning to develop allows each of these stakeholders to reflect on how they are contributing to a healthy workplace culture.
Yeah, I think something very interesting that you mentioned here is the role that external stakeholders like clients and partners, etc., play in the overall mental health of employees. Well, Aparna, there is one last question with respect to mental health that I'd like to ask you. I've seen that there are a lot of people who actually thrive when there is workplace rigor. So how should organizations, ensure that the needs of such people are also met?
I think organizations need to realize that work can be very stressful and a stressor, but it can also be therapeutic. And they need to understand that they have a role in promoting both of those things and addressing both. Because currently what I see happening is that organizations realize that employees are getting stressed and burnt out, but they expect them to cope with it on their own, or they provide ways for them to cope in terms of going to a yoga class or providing a counselor. But they also have to fundamentally look and see, how can we actually make the workplace less stressful? And some people have said that, people don't complain of overwork, but they complain of stress. So, how can work be less of a stressor is a conversation that I would love to see organizations have.
Yeah, that's great. So, Aparna, while we've discussed everything about mental health, psychological safety, and emotional well-being of employees today with you, I have a personal question for you, though. So, you are an author yourself, and you've written 2 books. Who is your favorite author, and which is your all-time favorite book?
Yes. So I'd like to answer that by looking at the books that have really changed me that I've read over the past few years. There's a book called How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. He's a Harvard Business School author. So how will you measure your life? And I think it has really interesting tools that you can use. I mean, there are a lot of books in this category, but this one has actually got a really interesting toolkit that you can apply for yourself, questions that you can ask yourself. And they're very, help me to find a lot of purpose and direction with what I was doing. So it's very practical as well as philosophical, both. I really loved a book called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. She is, I think, a book that every woman ought to read. Any man can, of course, read it also, but I just think it's about, it's quite a manifesto for women, I think, in the life that we currently have, where we have so many personal responsibilities alongside our professional dreams and, personal aspirations that we might have. Untamed. And then I've done some reading. I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any means, but some readings of Vedant and our own kind of literature, which has really been helpful to me. So we looked at a book called The Holocaust of Attachment by Swami Parthasarathy. And that has been really helpful for my own mental well-being. But it's not just the book, but it's the classes that were conducted, the satsangs that I attended for some time and continue to try and do so.
Come to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much, Aparna, for taking out the time from your busy schedule for this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.